What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. In today's episode, we will be talking a little bit about a controversial topic centered around whether or not you should invest or power up any of the Pokemon from the Research Breakthrough boxes. Typically, what we end up seeing with these is a bunch of legendary Pokemon, granting access to a lot of people who don't have access to raids. This is a way that they are able to get it, but a lot of people just find themselves questioning whether or not they should invest in it, and today we will be talking about reasons why you should, and of course generally why you shouldn't, but some special cases. There's going to be two main reasons centered around it, at least in my mind. Number one is that having some of these Pokemon at such a low level allows them to be accessible for PvP at the Great League, and since we have the Silph Road tournaments at that Great League, it could actually end up being a major benefit. And then the secondary one is just talking about dominant Pokemon that just make a lot of sense, especially if you are able to get yourself a high IV Pokemon. But first things first, let's talk about just how drastic of a difference it will cost you talking about level 15 Pokemon versus 20 and 25. After all, these are legendary Pokemon that are typically obtained through the raid process, so we will be talking about it from that way. So for example, we've got level 15 to 40, which is the typical level that we end up getting from these Research Breakthrough boxes. It will cost you 246,000 Stardust to get it up to level 40 and 268 candy. As opposed to just the regular raid level, you're going down to 225,000 Stardust and 248 candy. So you are saving 20 candy. That is actually a very big deal because legendary Pokemon to obtain the candy can be fairly expensive. And then finally, if you had a weather boosted edition, you're talking 194,000 Stardust to power it up and then 220 candy. So when you talk about the difference between these two, it's pretty drastic, and we're talking about like 48 candy or so, and then roughly saving about 50,000 Stardust away from it. So clearly, in most situations, it would make more sense to get that level 25, especially if you are able to trade it for a Lucky. You are going to save so much Stardust over time. But in this case, it could end up being beneficial for a couple of Pokemon for the simple fact that it's just another way to gain access to very good Pokemon. So recently, we ended up seeing Kyogre, Groudon, Latias, and Latios. Whether or not we should power these up, I'm going to actually give Latias and Latios a big X. I think that there are some better options that you could gain as opposed to these, like maybe Dragonite, Salamence. There's a couple of other Dragon type Pokemon that can perform better than this, but they're also not necessarily raid locked, and then of course they're just available at all points in time versus Latias and Latios only being available in the Research Breakthrough encounters. But when we talk about a Pokemon set like Kyogre and Groudon, these two Pokemon are absolutely worth it. If you end up getting yourself like 100% IV variation of these two, yes, it could end up being worth it. Sure, it will cost you, 30,000 Stardust more and will cost a little bit more candy. But if you're getting a very high IV option and these Pokemon aren't even necessarily available in raids, what other option do you have besides trading and, of course, doing the Lucky? Yes, I think that this would be at least some consideration that I would personally, if I got a 100% IV Kyogre, I'm definitely going to do it. And just imagine getting yourself a shiny variation of that. I would do it. Maybe not up to level 40, but definitely up to level 30. And then the same thing goes for Groudon. It's just a solid Pokemon. They will potentially get a new move in the future, like a signature move that could make them better. But I do predict that there will be a TM being made available that will allow you to get those special access moves, such as like a Community Day exclusive move. Moving on. We've already talked about Latias and Latios, so we're going to go ahead and skip those two. But for example, we've got our first Pokemon that makes a lot of sense to get it in this Research Breakthrough encounter and use it for PvP. We've got Lugia. So Lugia, as you can see with its typical CP, it is technically a little bit above 1500 CP. However, if you were to trade this with a friend, you could get a Lugia that would qualify for the Great League, and that's why it's such a great option, because if you ended up getting Lugia in at level 20 or 25 from a raid, it would not be able to qualify for the Great League, and that's what we end up seeing throughout the Silph Road. So in that case, it would make so much sense, and I'm actually very excited if I could ever get a Pokemon that is good in PvP, especially a legendary, but we just have to re-roll the IVs. This would be an absolute solid option. Ho-Oh, I'm probably going to give that a no, mostly related to its moveset, but who knows, it could end up getting updated in the future. Now we're going to go ahead and go back one more month where we see just the widest variety made available. We have already talked about Ho-Oh. We've already talked about Lugia and gave it a pass. When we talk about the Regis, I'm going to give them all a big no. I did see one cup where Regice was able to perform from a PvP perspective, but for the most part, they're just not really that good. Maybe with Regigigas that could end up being a different thing, but we'll have to see when that comes out. But when we talk about these Pokemon, I think Raikou could be worth the investment, especially if you were not able to participate in the legendary raid day for this Pokemon. It is literally the #1 electric type attacker currently. So if you get like a 96, 98, 100% IV, I would say it would be worth powering up. And then of course, when we talk about Entei, I'm probably going to give that one a no, as well as Suicune. So we have talked about a couple of Pokemon that do make a lot of sense, but what about some future Pokemon that would end up being a good investment? I'll go ahead and briefly just kind of go through a list and kind of explain it as quickly as possible. First one, we're talking about legendary birds. I think Zapdos would be really cool to have. It ended up getting a new moveset updated, so at least from a flying type, it's pretty solid. And it's going to mostly be from a PvP perspective. It ended up being a very solid option from PvP, especially on a couple of the themed cups. Moving on from that, we've got Moltres. Moltres is going to be good from the raid perspective, especially if we were able to get like the Sky Attack Moltres. I don't think we would ever be able to, since it is just an exclusive from the legendary raid day. But even if you can't get that, if you want to get Moltres from the fire typing, where you've got Fire Spin and Overheat, it is literally the #1 fire type attacker. So I do think that Moltres would be a solid option. And then the last and final two that I wanted to talk about is centered around Mewtwo. Mewtwo, just the regular form for just the general rating perspective. The fact that it is the #1 from the psychic typing, and then secondarily #3 if you are using it as an ice type attacker. I think it's great. Unfortunately, we won't necessarily have access to Shadow Ball, which is a little bit of a letdown. But even then, I think it still has some value associated to it if it were to ever be put in to this research breakthrough. And then finally, we've got Armored Mewtwo. Now, the reason why I'm excited about Armored Mewtwo being put into the research breakthrough is for the simple fact that we could end up seeing it drop to a low enough CP level to qualify for the Great League. And it is already a beast from a PvP perspective. It just simply can't qualify for the Great League just because of the levels that it is currently available at. Level 20, level 25. Even if you got a perfect 000 IV option through a trade, it would still not qualify currently for the Great League. So yeah, that's why I would want to add it to this option. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy this video. Hopefully this kind of gets your mind thinking a little bit and really weighing the cost between whether or not it is worth powering up, and kind of giving you some Pokemon that you should keep in mind and maybe consider moving forward. Also wanted to make a brief announcement. We've got an update to the Patreon page. I ended up adding in a new tier completely where you can have direct access to me to ask me any questions that you want related to Pokemon Go, and to help you answer questions, and then of course give you guidance if you ever need it. I also have a team that's answering questions as well for that. So if you are interested in that, definitely check out the link in the description. Go ahead and head over to the Patreon page. But anyways, I want to say thank you so much for the support on the channel. You guys have been amazing. The views have been crazy. The comments have been crazy. The likes have been crazy. The engagement has just been insane. And I wanted to just say thank you so much. And I will see you next time.